President Maithripala Sirisena also said it be possible that Daesh has launched a new strategy by targeting smaller countries. A security barricade in front of St. Anthony's Shrine, in Colombo, Sri Lanka, April 29, 2019, following suicide attacks across the island on Easter Sunday that killed hundreds. Reuters, foreign mastermind may be behind bombings. President Sirisena, a foreign mastermind, may have planned the Sri Lankan Easter Sunday bombings, Sri Lanka's President Maithripala Sirisena told Sky News. Sirisena also warned it may be possible Daesh has launched a new strategy by targeting smaller countries. Sri Lanka to resume Mass on Sunday. Cardinal public Mass will resume on Sunday, May 5, Sri Lanka's Catholic Church said on Tuesday, 2 weeks after Easter Sunday bombings killed 253 people at 3 churches and 3 luxury hotels. On the 5th of May we are going to begin Masses, Archbishop of Colombo, Cardinal Malcolm Ranjit said. But we will start with a smaller number of Masses and see if we can slowly increase it depending on how the situation develops, Ranjit said. Social media ban lifted. President's office. The Sri Lankan government has lifted a ban on social media platforms intended to stop the spread of rumors after the Easter Sunday bombings, a source from the president's office said on Tuesday. The ban on platforms such as Facebook, WhatsApp and Viber has been lifted with immediate effect, the source told Reuters. Security in Buddhist-majority Sri Lanka remains tight after the April 21 suicide bomb attacks on hotels and churches. More attacks imminent. Sri Lankan security officials warned that the group behind Easter Sunday's suicide bombings are planning imminent attacks and could be dressed in military uniforms. There could be another wave of attacks, the head of Ministerial Security Division, MSD, a unit of the police, said in a letter to lawmakers and other officials, seen by Reuters on Monday. The militants were targeting 5 locations for attacks on Sunday just past or on Monday, security sources said. The relevant information further notes that persons dressed in military uniforms and using a van could be involved in the attacks. There were no attacks on Sunday, and security across Sri Lanka has been ramped up. Tourist arrivals in Colombo to drop by 50%. Tourist arrivals in Colombo will fall by 50% following the Easter Sunday bombings that killed more than 250 people. Sri Lanka's Tourism Bureau Chairman Kishu Gomez said on Monday. Tourist arrivals in areas outside Colombo will go down by about 30% over the next 2 months following the bombings, he added. Sri Lankan Airlines CEO said the state-owned air carrier had a 10% increase in cancellations last week and he expects the number to go up. Sri Lanka President appoints new acting police chief. Sri Lankan President Maithripala Sirisena said on Monday he had appointed Chandana Wickramaratne, the second in command of the police, as acting police chief, the latest change in personnel after Easter Sunday suicide bombings. Over the weekend, 2 sources in the president's office told Reuters that Pujith Jayasundara, the police chief during the April 21 attacks, was refusing a request from the president to step down. Sri Lanka bans face covering. Sri Lankan President Maithripala Sirisena on Sunday announced a ban on face covering, a week after terrorists carried out coordinated suicide bombings that killed 253 people. Sirisena said he was using emergency powers to ban any form of face covering in public. The restriction will take effect from Monday, his office said in a statement. The ban is to ensure national security. No one should obscure their faces to make identification difficult, the statement said. It came days after local Islamic scholars urged Muslim women not to cover their faces amid fears of a backlash after the bombings carried out by affiliated to Daesh. Muslims in the majority Buddhist nation account for about 10% of its 21 million population. Only a small number of women wear the face veil or niqab, as it's known. Police raid headquarters. A group suspected of suicide bombing Sri Lankan armed police on Sunday launched a search of the headquarters of the National Tawheed Jamaat, suspected of being behind the suicide bombings on churches and hotels that killed more than 250 people. The raid took place at the NTJ's base in the eastern town of Katangkuti a day after the group was banned under new emergency laws. Police believe that Zarin Hashim, The alleged mastermind of the Easter Sunday attacks, led the group or a splinter faction to mount the attacks in Colombo as well as a church in Batticaloa in the East. Father, two brothers of Sri Lanka suicide bombings mastermind killed. Police sources: the father and two brothers of the suspected mastermind of Sri Lanka's Easter Sunday bombings were killed when security forces stormed their safe house 2 days ago, police sources and a relative of the suicide bombers told Reuters on Sunday. Zani Hashim, Rylwan Hashim and their father Muhammad Hashim, who were seen in a video circulating on social media calling for all-out war against non-believers, were among 15 killed in a fierce gun battle with the military in the east coast city of Kalamunai on Friday, 4 police sources said. Niaz Sharif, the brother-in-law of Zaran Hashim, the suspected ringleader of the wave of Easter Sunday bombings that killed over 250 people in churches and hotels across the island nation, told Reuters the video showed Zaran Hashim's 2 brothers and father. Afraid but unbowed, Sri Lanka Catholics pray for Easter bombing victims. Church bells tolled morning at Colombo's devastated St. Anthony's Shrine on Sunday, as scores of Christians wept but defiantly prayed and lit candles for the victims of the horrific Easter bombings. The bells rang out at 8:45 a.m., the moment a suicide bomber detonated his device inside the 18th-century church on Easter Sunday, one of 6 attacks on churches and luxury hotels that left 253 dead. The bomber destroyed part of the shrine's roof and scarred its walls with shrapnel, damaging the clock tower whose hands were still stuck at 8:45, a grim reminder of the destruction wreaked. The island's Roman Catholic leadership has suspended all public services, fearing new attacks. But on Sunday morning, as Sri Lanka's Christians sought to come to terms with the tragedy, scores of Catholics held a heavily guarded vigil outside the Colombo church. From teenagers to elderly men and women, to parents carrying their children in their arms, the crowd gradually swelled, as worshippers came out onto the streets to mourn. As they prayed and wept, some in silence, others loudly sobbing, some fingered rosary beads, while others sang hymns and lit candles, placing them inside metal boxes as a makeshift memorial to the victims. Kuslaw Stanislaus said he had traveled to St. Anthony's because he wanted to participate in a mass in some way. "We wanted to participate because we haven't been able to worship all week," the 30-year-old said. Insult to humanity for those living near the church, the bombing felt like a personal onslaught. "I come to this church every Sunday. It feels like my second home. It's like people blasted my own home," said Darshika Fernando, struggling to hold back tears. "We don't know when the church will open again, but we want it back soon," the 19-year-old said. About an hour after the vigil began, worshippers fell silent as the parish priest walked out to the entrance of the church and held up a statue of St. Anthony. The crowd raised their hands in prayer before resuming their solemn hymns. Navy forces have been deployed to clean up the church, remove bloodstains from its ceiling and wash away the overpowering stench of death that still lingered a week after the bombing. At the tightly guarded Roman Catholic Archbishop's residence in Colombo, Ranjit condemned the attacks as an insult to humanity, in a private mass that was broadcast live on the country's television channels. With President Maithripala Sirisena, Prime Minister Ranil Wickremesinghe and opposition leader Mahinda Rajapaksa in the small congregation, the Cardinal appealed for peace and unity in the multi-ethnic island of 21 million people. "In the name of God we cannot destroy any person," he said. "What happened last Sunday is a great tragedy, an insult to humanity," the Cardinal said, urging followers to show kindness to others as a sign of respect for all the victims. The authorities have blamed the attacks on a local group affiliated to Daesh, which has claimed responsibility. Daesh claims attack in Kalamunai. Daesh has claimed responsibility for 3 men who blew themselves up in clashes with Sri Lankan police, the terror group said in a statement. The men set off explosives after an hour-long gun battle with police Saturday, inside what was believed to be a terrorist hideout near the eastern town of Kalamunai, in the latest fallout from the Easter attacks. In a statement posted Saturday by Daesh propaganda unit, a MAC news agency, Daesh said 3 of its soldiers detonated their bombs after a fight with police. The statement said the men clashed with them, Sri Lankan police, with automatic weapons, and after exhausting their ammunition, detonated on them their explosive belts. 15 people died in the clashes, police said, including 3 women and 6 children. The violence came 6 days after the Easter Day bombings on 3 churches and 3 luxury hotels which killed at least 253 people and injured 500. Security forces armed with emergency powers have stepped up search operations for Islamic extremists since the bombings. Kalmani is in the same region as the hometown of the terrorist Zarin Hashim who founded the group accused of staging the attacks. Indian police warned Sri Lankan government about Njajasani. The executive director of the Institute for Conflict Management in New Delhi, said the Indian police knew it all. Indian police were investigating suspected sympathizers of Daesh in southern India when a name they had no record of surfaced, National Tawhid Jamaat, NTJ, the militant group that authorities say conducted the coordinated Easter Sunday attacks on churches and hotels in Sri Lanka that killed more than 250 people. The police managed to break into the group's communications and began tapping into the plot for what would become the bloodiest attack, Sani said. That is why the kind of detailing of the incident they received was very, very specific, he said. They knew the group, they knew the targets, they knew the time, they knew the whereabouts of the suicide bombers, and all of this was communicated to the Sri Lankan government. Top Sri Lankan officials have acknowledged that some of the island nation's intelligence units were given advance notice about the attacks, starting weeks ago and up until the morning of the bombings, but that little was done to prevent them. Groups linked to bombings ban. Sri Lanka's president is banning 2 groups allegedly linked to the Easter bombings under emergency powers that came into effect on Tuesday. The office of President Maithripala Sirisena said in a statement Saturday evening that NTJ and Jamaat-e Ibrahim, JMI, would be banned by presidential decree. Presidential spokesman Dharma Sri Ekanayake says the move allows the government to confiscate any property belonging to the 2 organizations. 15 killed and shootout. The bodies of 15 people, including 6 children, were discovered at the site of a fierce overnight gun battle on the east coast of Sri Lanka, a military spokesman said on Saturday, 6 days after a rash of suicide bomber attacks that killed more than 250 people. The gun battle between troops and suspected militants erupted on Friday evening in St. Hamaruthu in Ampara, to the south of the town of Batticaloa, site of one of the Easter Sunday blasts at luxury hotels and churches. The police and military had earlier said 4 gunmen and a civilian had been killed in the shootout. The 15 were found in the morning during clearance operations. Travel warning. The U.S. Department of State has ordered the departure of all school-age family members of U.S. government employees in kindergarten through 12th grade, it said in a statement, adding that it had also authorized non-emergency personnel to leave. Terrorists may attack with little or no warning, targeting tourist locations, transportation hubs, markets, shopping malls, government facilities, hotels, clubs, restaurants, places of worship, parks, major sporting and cultural events, educational institutions, airports, hospitals, and other public areas, it said. Shooting during police raid. Police have conducted raids in Ampara district of eastern province of Sri Lanka as part of the ongoing investigation into the Easter Sunday suicide bomb attacks, which killed over 250. A military spokesman said soldiers exchanged gunfire with suspects after attempting to raid a building in Sri Lanka's eastern province. Brigadier Sumit Adipati said the gun battle happened in the coastal town of Samantharai, 325 kilometers, 200 miles, from the capital, Colombo. During one search operation, authorities found a stock of explosives and other raw materials used to manufacture bombs. The raid took place in the town of Ampara St. Hamaruthu near Batticaloa in search of those responsible for the bombings. A search found explosives used to produce bombs, Daesh, uniforms, curtains with Daesh logo, 150 gel ignite sticks, 100,000 metal balls and a drone camera from a house in Samantharai, a spokesman said. No details of casualties from the raids were immediately available, but journalist Rule Raymond told TRT World a civilian was caught in the crossfire, without further elaborating. Nearly 10,000 soldiers were deployed across the Indian Ocean island state to carry out searches and provide security for religious centers, the military said on Friday. Sunday Masses cancelled in Sri Lanka. The Archbishop of Colombo said there will be no Sunday Masses until further notice after the Easter bombings in Sri Lanka. Ranjit made the comment during a news conference on Friday in the Sri Lankan capital. Ranjit appealed for financial support to rebuild the lives of affected people and reconstruct the churches targeted in the Daesh-claimed suicide bombings, which killed 253 people on Sunday. Countries warn travelers of more threats. Australia has warned travelers that terrorists are likely to carry out further attacks in Sri Lanka. Australia's threat level remained unchanged, advising travelers to reconsider your need to travel to Sri Lanka, one tier below the highest warning of do not travel. The U.S. has also warned Americans to avoid places of worship in Sri Lanka due to potential for more attacks. Britain advised its citizens against traveling to the island country. Germany issued similar warnings. Police hunt for suspects. Sri Lankan police are trying to track down suspects, especially those believed to be linked to the terror group that claimed responsibility for the attacks. At least 140 people believed linked to Daesh are being hunted by the police, President Maithripala Sirisena said on Friday. Saudi money may have gone to extreme organizations. PM Sri Lankan authorities are investigating the source of funding to terrorist organizations that may be operating in the country, Sri Lankan Prime Minister Ranil Wickremesinghe said in an interview on Thursday. Well, there has been money coming in from Saudi Arabia over the last 20, 30 years to religious organizations. I don't know who were the agencies who sent it. I mean Saudi Arabia or the Middle East has been the source of many of those funds and some of it has gone into these extreme organizations, the Prime Minister told AP. He said the authorities are investigating. Mosques hold Friday prayers despite warning. Some mosques in Sri Lanka held Friday prayers despite the potential for attacks after the Easter suicide bombings. At 12:10 p.m. local time, the call to prayer echoed through the Masjidus Salam Juma Masjid Mosque in the capital Colombo. We are sending a message to extremists that we will not be scared or deterred, said Rais Sali, chairman of the Dawat Agaha Juma Mosque. But the main reason we are here is because we want to say a special prayer for the victims of the church bombings, he added. Sri Lankan authorities had asked Muslims to pray at home rather than attend communal Friday prayers that are the most important of the week. Armed police stood guard outside mosques on Friday. Wanted radical leader died in hotel bombing. Prasajan, a local extremist group leader believed to have played a key role in Sri Lanka's deadly Easter bombings, led an attack against a Colombo hotel, the country's president confirmed on Friday. What intelligence agencies have told me is that Zarin was killed during the Shangri-La attack, President Sirisena told reporters, referring to Zarin Hashim, leader of the local extremist group NTJ. He added that Hashim led the attack against the high-end hotel and was accompanied by a second bomber, identified only as Ilham. He said the information came from military intelligence and was based in part on CCTV footage recovered from the scene. Hashim appeared in a video released by Daesh after it claimed the bombings, but his whereabouts after the blasts were not immediately clear. Security forces had been on a hunt for Hashim, believed to be around 40, after the government named the NTJ as its prime suspect. Sri Lanka police chief resigned. Sri Lanka's top police official, Inspector General of Police Bujith Jayasundara, has resigned over failures that led to the deadly Easter bomb attacks, the country's president said Friday. The IGP has resigned. He has sent his resignation to the acting defense secretary. I'll nominate a new IGP soon, President Sirisena said. Sirisena's nominee has to be confirmed by a constitutional council. The resignation comes after the country's top defense ministry official, Defense Secretary Hemasiri Fernando, resigned on Thursday. Also on Friday, an official Sri Lanka police Twitter account was deleted after it misidentified a U.S. human rights activist as a suspected Sri Lankan serial bomber. Late Thursday, police posted the names and photos of 3 women and 2 men on Twitter that they said were at-large suspects in the Easter Sunday assault. One of the named was a U.S. activist, who quickly tweeted that she had been falsely identified. Sri Lankan police replied with an apology for the inconvenience. Sri Lankan Prime Minister Ranil Wickremesinghe says Saudi money may have gone to extreme organizations. pic.twitter.com/wobserofk, TRT World Now, @TrentWorldNow, April 26, 2019. Sri Lanka attacks death toll around 250 to 260, not 359, Health official: the death toll in Sri Lanka's Easter Day attack is around 100 fewer than the 359 originally thought, a top health official told Reuters on Thursday. It could be 250 or 260. I can't exactly say. There are so many body parts and it is difficult to give a precise figure, Anil Jasingh, the Director General of Sri Lanka's Health Services told Reuters in a phone interview. Ruwan Vijayawardene, Sri Lanka's Deputy Defence Minister whose ministry is responsible for the island's police force, said the death toll had been revised down to 253 due to inaccurate figures provided by the country's morgues. Unfortunately, the health ministry provided the earlier number to us, he said. Scared Muslim refugees flee Sri Lankan homes over attack fears. Hundreds of Muslim refugees in western Sri Lanka have taken refuge in mosques and a police station after facing intimidation following the deadly Easter bombings, activists said on Thursday. The attacks have been condemned by leaders of the country's Muslim minority who have said mosques will not bury the bombers, and the community has been left in fear of a backlash. Scores of Ahmadi Muslims who settled in Negombo after fleeing persecution in their home countries have been thrown out of their accommodation by landlords, according to officials. Prime Minister Wickremesinghe said that security forces were trying to help the Ahmadis. Wickremesinghe said that some people had become suspicious of foreigners, not of Muslims per se. In the heat of the moment, a few have been attacked. Defense Secretary resigns. The office of Sri Lanka's president said the country's defense secretary has resigned after security forces failed to prevent the spate of bombings. The office issued a statement on Thursday saying that Hemasiri Fernando would continue to serve until his replacement has been appointed. Government misidentifies Muslim American activist as an attack suspect. Sri Lankan authorities released a list of names and photos of 6 suspects wanted in connection with the Easter Sunday attacks, but had to retract one of them due to a case of mistaken identity. Amar Majid is a Muslim American activist whose picture was erroneously placed on a suspect list next to the suspect's name Fatima Qadia. This is obviously completely false and frankly, considering that our communities are already greatly afflicted with issues of surveillance, I don't need more false accusations and scrutiny, Majid wrote on Twitter. All Sri Lanka Catholic Church services suspended. All of Sri Lanka's Catholic churches have been ordered to stay closed and suspend services until security improves after deadly Easter bombings, a senior priest told AFP on Thursday. On the advice of the security forces, we are keeping all churches closed, the priest said. There will be no public mass said until further notice. President calls for resignations of top security officials. Sri Lanka's president has asked for the resignations of the defense secretary and national police chief, after security forces failed to take action preventing the attacks. It wasn't immediately clear who would be replacing them. 9 suicide bombers. Sri Lanka police on Wednesday said investigations confirmed there were 9 suicide bombers, of whom 8 have been identified. One of the 9 bombers was a woman, Deputy Defence Minister Vijayawardene told reporters on Wednesday. More than 100 people have now been arrested in the country in connection with Easter Sunday blasts, Vijayawardene said. Ongoing terrorist plotting. The United States had no prior knowledge of the Easter Sunday suicide bombing attacks on churches and hotels in Sri Lanka, but now believes there is ongoing terrorism plotting in the country, Washington's ambassador to Colombo said on Wednesday. We had no prior knowledge of these attacks, Ambassador Elena Teplitz told reporters in Colombo. We believe there are ongoing terrorist plots. Terrorists can strike without warning. Typical venues are large gatherings, public spaces. Death toll rises to 359 people. Police say the death toll in the Easter attacks in Sri Lanka has risen to 359 and more suspects have been arrested. Police spokesman Ruwan Gunasakara also said on Wednesday morning that 18 suspects were arrested overnight, raising the total detained to 58. President vows security reorganization. Sri Lanka's president on Tuesday vowed a major shake-up of the military's top brass in the wake of the deadly Easter suicide bombings after the government admitted warnings were ignored. President Sirisena, who is also Defense and Law and Order Minister, said he will carry out a complete reorganization of the security forces and the police under his control. I hope to make major changes in the leadership of the security forces in the next 24 hours, the president said in a nationwide address. The restructuring of the security forces and the police will be completed within a week. More militants still out there, p.m. Sri Lanka's Prime Minister warned there are more explosives and militants out there after Easter suicide bombings that killed over 320 people. Wickremesinghe made the comment on Tuesday at a news conference and said some officials will likely lose their jobs over intelligence lapses surrounding the attack. Wickremesinghe acknowledged there was a prior warning, and said India's embassy was eyed as a possible target. The toll from the coordinated bombings at churches, luxury hotels and other sites now stands at 321 dead and 500 wounded. He said a planned attack at a fourth hotel failed and that the leader of a local militant group blamed for the assault may have led the attacks and been killed. Meanwhile, Sirisena on Tuesday showed foreign diplomats pictures of suspected bombers and gave a briefing to diplomats based in Colombo after the Easter Sunday blasts. New Zealand. No intel linking Sri Lanka bombings. The office of New Zealand's Prime Minister said she is aware of comments linking Sri Lanka's Easter bombings to the mosque attacks in Christchurch, but hasn't seen any intelligence upon which such an assessment might be based. The statement came on Tuesday after Sri Lanka's Minister of Defence, Vijayawardene, made the claim to Parliament, without offering evidence. New Zealand Prime Minister Jacinda Ardern's office also added that it understood the Sri Lankan investigation into the attack is in its early stages. The Christchurch shootings killed 50 people in March. FBI assisting Sri Lanka authorities with probe of bomb attacks. FBI is assisting Sri Lankan authorities with their investigation of the bomb attacks, a spokeswoman for the U.S. law enforcement agency said on Tuesday. The Washington Post earlier had reported that the FBI had offered expertise to test evidence and that analysts were scouring databases for information regarding the attacks. Daesh claims responsibility for Sri Lanka bombings. Daesh has claimed responsibility for coordinated bombings, the group's Samak propaganda agency said on Tuesday. 45 children killed in Sri Lanka attacks, and at least 45 children were among them. More than 320 people killed in the suicide bomb attacks in Sri Lanka, the United Nations said Tuesday. The total now is 45 children who died, UNICEF spokesman Christophe Bollierac told reporters in Geneva. He stressed that others are wounded and are now fighting for their lives, meaning the toll among minors from the Sunday attacks could rise. The number wounded was close to 500. Retaliation for Christchurch. Sri Lanka's Easter Sunday bomb attacks were retaliation for a recent twin attack on mosques in New Zealand on March 15, a Sri Lankan official said on Tuesday, adding that two domestic militant groups were believed to be responsible. The initial investigation has revealed that this was in retaliation for the New Zealand mosque attack. Junior Minister for Defence Vijayawardene told Parliament. It was done by National Tawhid Jamaat along with JMI, he said, referring to another local group. Vijayawardene made the comments without providing evidence or explaining where the information came from. Vijayawardene told Parliament the government possessed information that the bombings were carried out by an Islamic fundamentalist group in response to the Christchurch attacks. He also blamed weakness within Sri Lanka's security apparatus for failing to prevent the 9 bombings. By now it has been established that the intelligence units were aware of this attack and a group of responsible people were informed about the impending attack, Vijayawardene said. However, this information has been circulated among only a few officials. Security measures ramped up. Authorities in Sri Lanka further increased security measures on Tuesday after the Easter Sunday suicide bombings. Police issued orders that anyone parking a car on the street and leaving it unattended must put a note with their phone number on the windscreen. Postal officials meanwhile said they would no longer accept pre-wrapped parcels for mailing. Ignored warning raises questions. A warning shared with Sri Lankan security agencies on April 11 said a local group was planning a suicide terror attack against churches in Sri Lanka. Priyalal Dasanayaka, the Deputy Inspector General of Police, signed the letter addressed to the directors of 4 Sri Lankan security agencies. He asked the 4 security directors to pay extra attention to the places and VIPs in their care. The intelligence report attached to his letter said the NTJ was targeting some important churches in a suicide terrorist attack that was planned to take place shortly. The report named 6 individuals likely to be involved in the plot. Attackers had incendiary leader. The purported leader of the NTJ began posting videos online 3 years ago calling for non-Muslims to be eliminated, faith leaders said on Tuesday. Much remain unclear about how the little-known group called carried out 6 large near-simultaneous suicide bombings striking churches and hotels. Some of the intelligence people saw his picture but they didn't take action, said N.M. Amin, the president of the Muslim Council of Sri Lanka. Syrian national detained. Sri Lankan police detained a Syrian national for questioning over the Easter Sunday attacks on churches and hotels, 3 government and military sources told Reuters on Tuesday. The Terrorist Investigation Division of the police arrested a Syrian national following the attacks for interrogation, a source said. 2 other officials with knowledge of the investigation confirmed the detention. He was arrested after the interrogation of local suspects, a second source said. Police arrest 40 suspects, up to 310 dead. Police spokesman Ruwan Gunasakara said the death toll from Sunday's attacks has risen to 310. As a state of emergency took effect on Tuesday giving the Sri Lankan military wartime powers, police arrested 40 suspects, including the driver of a van allegedly used by the suicide bombers and the owner of a house where some of them lived. Sri Lankan authorities also plan to brief foreign diplomats and receive assistance from the FBI and other foreign intelligence gathering agencies after officials disclosed Monday that warnings had been received weeks ago of the possibility of an attack by a small but radical group blamed for the bloodshed. Day of mourning. Sri Lankans across the island nation began observing 3 minutes of silence early on Tuesday morning to pay tribute to the victims. National flags were lowered and people bowed their heads as the silence began at 03:00 GMT, 8:30 AM local time, the time the first of 6 attacks occurred on Sunday. In Negombo, mass burials started at a cemetery near St. Sebastian Church, one of the attack sites. FBI says it's aiding Sri Lanka investigation. The FBI said it's providing assistance in the investigation into the Easter bombings in Sri Lanka. An FBI spokeswoman confirmed the aid on Monday but did not elaborate on what specific help was being offered or provided. The FBI routinely helps foreign governments in investigating terror attacks outside the United States, including by providing agents on the ground or technical expertise. Military given sweeping powers. After bombing Sri Lanka's president gave the military sweeping police powers starting on Tuesday in the wake of the Easter bombings, while officials disclosed that intelligence agencies had warned weeks ago of the possibility of an attack by the extremist group blamed for the bloodshed. The military was given a wider berth to detain and arrest suspects, powers that were used during the Civil War but withdrawn when it ended. These powers were given to the military under a state of emergency that came into effect at 18:30 GMT on Monday. Wickremesinghe said he feared the massacre could unleash instability and he vowed to vest all necessary powers with the defense forces to act against those responsible. Social media shutdown raises fears on free expression. Sri Lanka's decision to block social media following deadly suicide attacks highlights a growing distrust of online platforms. But critics said the move is likely to restrict the flow of important news and information as well as abusive content. The move comes amid growing frustration by governments around the world with internet platforms over the propagation of misinformation and incitements of violence. According to the digital rights group NetBlocks, Sri Lanka blocked Facebook, WhatsApp, Instagram, YouTube, Viber, Snapchat and Facebook Messenger following the Easter bombings targeting churches and hotels. 39 foreign nationals among killed. A total of 39 foreign nationals, including 2 Turkish people, lost their lives in the terror attacks in Sri Lanka, local media reported. Turkey, Japan, the UK, Denmark, India, the Netherlands, China, Australia and Portugal are the countries that have confirmed casualties of their citizen. However, there is conflicting information from Sri Lanka government officials about how many foreigners died in the attacks. Tourism Minister John Amaratunga said 39 foreigners were killed. But the country's foreign ministry put the number of foreigners killed 31. The differing figures could not immediately be reconciled. Late Monday night, National Day of Mourning. Sri Lanka's president has declared April 23 a national day of mourning. President Sirisena's office announced the measure in a statement late Monday. The statement also said that Sirisena would meet with foreign diplomats to seek international assistance. It cited intelligence agencies' reports that international groups were involved with the Easter Sunday bombings in Sri Lanka. The statement did not provide more details about the groups. The statement also said the president instructed Sri Lanka's security forces to provide additional security at the nation's Catholic churches, PM not alerted to warning because of feud, ministerial rift between Sri Lanka's president and prime minister, which sparked a crisis last year, came under scrutiny, with questions over how the government handled a recent warning of an attack. The premier has been kept out of intelligence briefings since he fell out with the president, a government minister said, a day after the attacks. Police had been warned this month about a possible attack on churches by a little-known domestic extremist group, according to a document seen by Reuters, but Prime Minister Wickremesinghe had not been told of the report, dated April 11, that said a foreign intelligence agency had warned of attacks on churches by domestic militant group NTJ, Health Minister Rajith Seenaratne told reporters. It was not immediately clear what action, if any, was taken in response to the tip-off. When we asked about the intelligence report, the Prime Minister was not aware of this, said Seenaratne, who also briefs reporters on the deliberations of the cabinet. It was not clear if the President, Sirisena, was aware of the report, but the top security organization, the Security Council, reports to him, while the Prime Minister was no longer invited to council meetings because of the rift, Seenaratne said. The president was out of the country when the bombers struck. His office declined to comment. Attacks carried out by 7 suicide bombers. A government investigator said on Monday that the coordinated Easter Sunday bombings that ripped through Sri Lankan churches and luxury hotels were carried out by 7 suicide bombers. The bombings, Sri Lanka's deadliest violence since a devastating civil war ended a decade ago on the island nation, killed at least 290 people with more than 500 wounded, police spokesman Ruwan Gunasakara said on Monday. Government says local radical group behind blasts. The Sri Lankan government believes a local extremist group called the NTJ was behind the deadly suicide bomb attacks that killed nearly 300 people, government spokesman Rajitha Seenaratne said on Monday. Seenaratne, who is also a cabinet minister, added that the government was investigating whether the group had international support. We don't see that only a small organization in this country can do all that, he said. Not much is known about the NTJ, a group that came to prominence last December when its followers were accused of attacking Buddhist statues in Kagale district. The act outraged the country's majority Buddhist community. NTJ Secretary Abdul Razak has been arrested several times on charges of inciting religious unrest. Sri Lanka's police chief issued a warning on April 11, saying a foreign intelligence agency had reported NTJ was planning attacks on churches and the Indian High Commission. International network involved in the bombings. The Easter Sunday bomb attacks in Sri Lanka were carried out with the help of an international network, cabinet spokesman Seenaratne said on Monday. We do not believe these attacks were carried out by a group of people who are confined to this country, Seenaratne said. There was an international network without which these attacks could not have succeeded. Meanwhile, Sri Lankan police investigating the bombings are examining reports that intelligence agencies had warnings of possible attacks, officials said the day after the assault. 2 government ministers have alluded to intelligence failures. Telecommunications Minister Harin Fernando tweeted that his father had heard of the possibility of an attack as well and had warned him not to enter popular churches. Some intelligence officers were aware of this incident. Therefore there was a delay in action. What my father heard was also from an intelligence officer. Serious action need to be taken as to why this warning was ignored. I was in Badula last night. pic.twitter.com/ssgaj1x, Harin Fernando, @FernandoHarin, April 21, 2019. Mano Ganeshan, the Minister for National Integration, said his ministry's security officers had been warned by their division about the possibility that 2 suicide bombers would target politicians. A week before, my ministerial security division, MSD, officers had been warned by their division on 2 suspected suicide bombers in Colombo targeting politicians. #Lanka, Mano Ganesan, @Mano Ganesan, April 21, 2019. To use social media responsibly. Sri Lanka's UN ambassador is cautioning Sri Lankans overseas to use social media responsibly in the wake of the Easter Sunday bombings in their country. Maithripala Sirisena statement Monday came after his government shut down most social sites within the island nation. The move reflected rising distrust in American internet giants' ability to control harmful content. The ambassador said the government is temporarily blocking sites to prevent speculative and mischievous attempts to spread rumors until investigations are concluded. He urged expatriates to use social platforms to support one another, but to prevent inadvertently spread panic and mistrust. There was blood everywhere. Police's Criminal Investigation Department, which is handling the investigation into the blasts, will look into those reports, Gunasakar said. Earlier, Defense Minister Vijayawardena described the blasts as a terrorist attack by extremists, and police said 13 suspects had been arrested, though there was no immediate claim of responsibility. Vijayawardena said most of the bombings were believed to have been suicide attacks, but officials have yet to say who they believe is behind the attacks. The Tamil Tigers, once a powerful rebel army known for their use of suicide bombers, were crushed by the government in 2009. They also had little history of targeting Christians. While anti-Muslim bigotry fed by ultranationalist Buddhists has swept Sri Lanka in recent years, the island also has no history of violent Muslim militants. The country's small Christian community has seen only scattered incidents of harassment in recent years. Sunday's attacks, mostly in or around Colombo, the capital, collapsed ceilings and blew out windows, killing worshippers and hotel guests in one scene after another of smoke, soot, blood, broken glass, screams and wailing alarms. A morgue worker in the town of Negombo, outside Colombo, where St. Sebastian's church was targeted, said many bodies were hard to identify because of the extent of the injuries. He spoke on condition of anonymity. At the Shangri-La Hotel, a witness said people were being dragged out after the blast. There was blood everywhere, said Bonika Harris Chandra, a 24-year-old from Colombo and founder of a tech marketing company. He was heading to the hotel for a meeting when it was bombed. People didn't know what was going on. It was panic mode. Most of those killed were Sri Lankans, but the 3 bombed hotels and one of the churches, St. Anthony's Shrine, are frequented by foreign tourists, and Sri Lanka's foreign ministry said the bodies of at least 27 foreigners from a variety of countries were recovered. The foreign victims included nationals from Turkey, Britain, China, India, Japan, Portugal and the US. Streets in the capital were largely deserted on Monday morning, with most shops closed and a heavy deployment of soldiers and police. Stunned clergy and onlookers gathered at St. Anthony's Shrine, looking past the soldiers to the stricken church. Curfew lifted after the chaotic night. The Sri Lankan government lifted a curfew that had been imposed during the night, but most social media remained blocked on Monday after officials said they needed to curtail the spread of false information and ease tension in the country of about 21 million people. Wickremesinghe said he feared the massacre could trigger instability in Sri Lanka, and he vowed to vest all necessary powers with the defense forces to take action against those responsible. Ranjit called on Sri Lanka's government to mercilessly punish those responsible because only animals can behave like that. The scale of the bloodshed recalled the worst days of Sri Lanka's 26-year civil war, when the Tamil Tigers, from the ethnic Tamil minority, sought independence from the Sinhalese-dominated country. The Sinhalese are largely Buddhist. The Tamils are Hindu, Muslim, and Christian. Sri Lanka, off the southern tip of India, is about 70% Buddhist. In recent years, tensions have been running high between hardline Buddhist monks and Muslims. 2 Muslim groups in Sri Lanka condemned the church attacks, as did countries around the world. Catholic Pope Francis expressed condolences at the end of his traditional Easter Sunday blessing in Rome. 6 nearly simultaneous blasts took place in the morning at the Shrine and the Cinnamon Grand, Shangri-La and Kingsbury hotels in Colombo, as well as at 2 churches outside Colombo. A few hours later, 2 more blasts occurred just outside Colombo, one at a guest house where 2 people were killed, the other near an overpass, a Sri Lankan military spokesman, Brig. Samit Adipata said. Also, 3 police officers were killed during a search at a suspected safe house on the outskirts of Colombo when its occupants apparently detonated explosives to prevent arrest, authorities said. Authorities said a large bomb had been found and defused late Sunday on an access road to the international airport. Air Force Group Captain Gihan Senaviratna said Monday that authorities found a pipe bomb filled with 50 kilograms, 110 pounds, of explosives. It was large enough to have caused damage to a 400-meter, 400-yard radius, he said. Harris Chandra, who witnessed the attack at the Shangri-La Hotel, said there was a lot of tension after the bombings, but added, "We've been through these kinds of situations before." He said Sri Lankans are an amazing bunch and noted that his social media feed was flooded with photos of people standing in long lines to give blood. Source: Trit World and agencies. Let's block ads. Why?